Now, hi, Pau. Thank you for being there. You are also a member of this research group on caravans. So please let us know who you are, what are you doing, and why are you interested in this research group or in caravans, so everybody can have an idea of your work.
Okay, well, Carlos, first of all, thank you very much to include me in. I'm pretty new on the topic, so no, not as much as an expert yet, but I think kind of like my contribution to the group can be also interesting to create this transdisciplinary approach that or that we are all engaged, no, in relation to the Sahara and in relation to kind of the life, no, in the region. My name is Pau. I've been coordinating an artist in residency program in a really small village, 50 kilometers south of Barcelona. This artist in residency program was created thanks to a master's I did in London in critical art management and media cultural studies. And this master to understand then the methodology I implemented in order to develop the residency, as it has kind of like two main areas of action. One is more research-based, and the other one is much more practical. In the practical side, we've been organizing artists in residencies in this house of my grandmother in this small village of Llorenç del Penedès for around 7 years. The strategy was to bring together artists, not only artists, but creative people working in different fields, in anthropology, in sociology, in urbanism, in ecology, in this house. 4 of them at the same time with a time frame of 2 months, and to work together with the community. So that's why this interdisciplinary approach as well, because kind of like they were collaborating with different associations from the village. No, we were doing 3 residencies a year with 4 artists in each residency, so that's like 12 artists a year. And yeah, for 7 years, so kind of like it has been kind of like a really interesting space of sharing and of changing as well, no? So that's for one side, in the creative side of it. The more research part, it happens in the second part of the year. This lasts for like 6 months, and in the other 6 months, I try to look for funding to develop different projects. And I always been interested in the Maghreb region and North African region, first of all, because in Spain and in Catalonia, in each village, we have a community of Moroccans, of people from the Maghreb, and actually we in Spain and in Catalonia we had a long history of interaction, no, between these different communities. And as far as CeRCCa, the organization that I'm organizing or I'm coordinating, is focused in engaging with the local community. One of the main interest for us was to establish a dialogue with the local community of Moroccans and Maghrebi in the village. So that's for one side, and then the other side, in 2011, I think it was, I had the chance to have a first visit to Morocco. That was thanks to Mireia Estrada, which she's the coordinator of Jiwar, which is this residency space in Barcelona. As you know, what Jiwar means neighborhood, and they have like a similar philosophy. The husband of Mireia is from Morocco, and he knew a guy that wanted to develop a residency program in Fez. And he was looking for someone to help in the development of this residency program. As far as I had this kind of like background on artists in residencies, not only as a practitioner but also as a researcher, thanks to the masters I did, I felt quite confident and quite to be part of this adventure of this residency in Fez. My surprise was that obviously my focus and the focus of the guy that wanted to organize the residency was like really, really different. In my perspective, to start a residency, the first thing that is important is to make some kind of like, to be aware of what is already happening in the region, no? To be aware of the different residency programs that operate, in this case in Morocco. And for me, I was kind of like trying to establish like a small, or build step by step a small network, both in a local level but also in the regional level. So instead, for this guy, the main aim was to actually start inviting artists, and somehow without any funding strategy. So it was kind of like a little bit strange. So the experience was really challenging. But as you know, from the challenges, you can also always find kind of like fruitful outcomes. The fruitful outcome in this case was that, first of all, before me traveling to Morocco, I did a small research on to see which artists and residencies were operating in the region, and I did this research using the main networks of artists and residency programs, for example, Trans Artists or Trans Artists. And it was really surprising that in these networks there was the visibility or the presence of artists and residencies of Morocco was like really minimal at that time in 2011. So there was maybe kind of like 3 or 4. Instead, when you are working on the field, and when I was like traveling in Morocco and asking people, kind of like step by step, lots of other initiatives started to pop out. No, so that was really great. No, really interesting to see that sometimes we see these networks as really complete, but there is kind of like alternative also spaces that are not visible through this international network. So that was for one side, and what the other side was that I had the opportunity to go and visit these spaces. So what I did, I was going with my small camera and was asking people quite randomly. It was kind of like quite by chance, no, asking you about artist in residency programs, and the great thing was that I had the time and the means to go and visit these spaces. So step by step, I've been building this kind of small archive of video interviews to artists in residency coordinators. These interviews are focused in 2 main strategies. One of them is self-promotion, so the promotion of the same spaces. But by the other side, you also have another side that is much more critical, much more self-reflective about the challenges, about the problems that they face, about kind of like the conditions about that they are dealing with, about kind of like the contemporary art scene in Morocco as well. One of the persons that helped me most in all this process was Heidi Vogels from Trans Artists. And also, thanks to her, we had the chance to share all this archive together with many other people in the Marrakech Biennale in 2012, I think it was. So this is a little bit my engagement, my first engagement with artists in residencies in the Arab world, no? In this case, in the Maghreb. That was in 2012, 11-12. In 2013, thanks to a grant from Annalyn Foundation, which is called DAURAC, Citizen Exchange Program, I had the opportunity to go to Egypt. The idea in that case was also to kind of like, I was traveling to Egypt to collaborate with an organization called El Madina for Performing and Digital Arts, which is based in Alexandria, and they were also really interested about artists in residency programs. And when I went there, I showed them the archive, and they were fascinated to really see that they didn't know anything of what was going on in Morocco. So kind of like I was showing them kind of like different interviews that I did, and they were like really surprised of kind of like this kind of like really vibrant, you could say, you know, really kind of somehow kind of like really vivid, no, kind of like artist in residency scene in Morocco. So so yeah, they proposed that maybe would be interesting to develop the same methodology in Egypt, and thanks to their knowledge, they introduced me to several people in the country, and I could also develop this around like 10 interviews also in Egypt. This time not only to artists in residency coordinators, but also to different researchers and cultural operators in the region. With all this material, which is around kind of like 15 interviews, plus all the research being done on funding, like really funding organizations, and also like resources like research centers, archives, online magazines talking about kind of like mobility, talking about hospitality, talking about cultural exchange, talking about contemporary art in the Arab world. We developed a first platform, which is called the North Africa Cultural Mobility Map, and it's kind of like a container of all this information. So this platform is divided in different sections. In the first section, you have a map of artist in residency programs in North Africa. This includes, for now, only Morocco, Algeria, a bit of Tunisia, and Egypt, not Libya, and not Mauritania either. So you have this map. Then you also have all the interviews that are being edited and translated into French and English. And then you also have a part of funding, where you have all these funding organizations. And then you have also a part of resources, which is, as I said, kind of like all these networks, all these other platforms, all these other kind of like hubs of research and reflection on contemporary art and artists and artists in residencies in the region. So with this platform, we were lucky enough to get funding from NACMM Foundation, and the funding was to continue developing this platform, but in collaboration with different organizations from the region, not only CeRCCa and El Medina, but other organizations that would be interested to engage in this mapping. No? Organizations that we applied with to NACMM Foundation are Atelier Observatoire in Casablanca, Ladies Buit in Marrakesh, Transcultural Dialogues in Algiers, Maison de and Transcultural Dialogues in Algiers, plus an organization from Barcelona, which is called GZER, which has been doing exchanges between Barcelona, Tunis, and Algiers for like more than 4 years now. So our first meeting, we got the grant, and our first meeting was in Barcelona in September 2016. And what was really interesting to acknowledge and to kind of like experience was that most of these organizations were really happy with the project, but at the same time, they want to go further. They didn't see the project as a map. They didn't see the project as a focus only in North Africa, and they didn't see the project only focus in cultural mobility. So kind of like the name itself was like really a problem, no? Because kind of like obviously North Africa has lots of kind of like different connotations, and is kind of limiting the dialogue that has been always existing somehow between North Africa and, for example, the Sahel, for example, Western Africa, and taking kind of like the desert, the Sahara Desert, more as a border than as a bridge, which is actually what is it, no? So, and then also cultural mobility was a little bit of an issue, because why to be mobile, which is the reason for this mobility, which is the mobility per se is not the key question, no? For most of the partners, what was interesting, it was only not only mobility of individuals and all the problems that this has nowadays with all the new restrictions with the Schengen visa, with the Schengen restrictions, with the creation of kind of like Europe as an independent entity, and the building up of all these kind of like walls and borders, and all the problems of mobility for Arab artists. But also they were also interested in the mobility of knowledges, which is something that I find like fascinating, no? How kind of like this dialogue has been always there, and kind of like in a more, you could say even in a more kind of like academic level, no? Kind of like these different traditions of knowledge production has been always enriching each other, no? So really interesting outcome of the meeting in September of this North Africa Cultural Mobility Map. Interesting in the sense that what it was needed was a reconsideration, no? Kind of like a restructuring of the whole project. So this restructuring took place like less than 1 month ago in Algiers, which is the second meeting that we did. The first one was in Barcelona in September. The second one is in Algiers in February, and that was a huge earthquake kind of thing. Actually, the North Africa Cultural Mobility Map as a platform somehow doesn't exist anymore. So why it doesn't exist anymore? Okay, so kind of like the main point that we were talking about in Algiers was which were the linking points between all the organizations. And after doing all this kind of like more like you know, kind of like different methodologies, much more kind of like with post-its and with kind of like papers of different colors and stuff. One of the linking points that we were all quite keen on and quite kind of like active on was in reactivation of local memory, reactivation of cultural heritage in the region. So because we got another grant from NACMM, we saw this reactivation as the new step of the North Africa Cultural Mobility Map, but different from it. So this reactivation and the aim of this new approach is to give resources to different organizations in the region, kind of like the partner organizations in the region, to give them resources, not only financial resources, but also like you know, kind of like skill sharing and different kind of like expertise to develop projects that already are taking place. For example, in Atelier Observatoire, they are developing the restoration of a film from the 1970s of this experimental filmmaker documenting a scene of the 1970s in Morocco together with this Les Souffles magazine. And it was a moment of kind of like really experimental, of really kind of like engagement, political engagement, a moment of kind of like really interesting debates and really interesting exchanges, not only in Morocco, but also kind of like all the Maghreb. You have to remember that also Algiers at that moment was kind of like a capital of the revolution, no? With kind of like the Black Panthers going there, with kind of different kind of like big revolutionary figures kind of like being really active there. So kind of like through the restoration of this film, what Atelier Observatoire wants to explain a little bit this history in the region. So that is the project which is kind of proposed by Atelier Observatoire. Another project is the restoration of the radio archive that exists in Algeria from the 1970s in the same period, and this radio Algerian called was like the speaker of kind of like all these movements. So kind of like there is like a curator, Jasmine, that is doing a research on that, and we are going to facilitate kind of like all this research. For example, in Tunis, the Maison de l'Image wants to develop a project with the archive of photography that is being digitized in together with Camille Lazare Foundation. So that's another one. No? So kind of like that, you can see that there's these different projects that we are helping to make them evolve and to have kind of like another kind of visibility. So this new platform, this new approach of reactivation of local memory is called Kibrit. Kibrit in Arabic means match, no? When you have a match and so this is the Kibrit platform or the Kibrit working group, and we are still working on it. We actually are going to present it in at the end of this month, at the end of March in Tunis as part of this South Med CV project. So in the case of CeRCCa, obviously we were really interested on reactivation and local memory, but also we put a lot of effort in the North Africa Cultural Mobility Map, and it was kind of like we felt a little bit like displaced, you could say, no? And it has been really interesting to see that actually this reactivation approach comes in the origin of the North Africa Cultural Mobility Map. The North Africa Cultural Mobility Map, the form that it took, it was like a really flat info platform, but that was only the first stage of this project. The second stage, in our understanding, was much more curatorial, much more research, much more activist, much more kind of like dynamic. So CeRCCa is now in charge of this North Africa Cultural Mobility Map, and this North Africa Cultural Mobility Map has also changed in order to adapt to the new situation, has also changed its name and its focus. The name of the new name of the North Africa Cultural Mobility Map is called HARAKAT, which is movements in Arabic. And as you can see, this HARAKAT concept is an umbrella that puts together kind of like not only artists in residencies as kind of like a way of kind of like reflecting on movement and the possibility of movement of artists coming from Europe or Arab to Europe, no? But also it becomes much larger in the sense of including as well a research that it would be kind of like looking as a bird in the situation of mobility, not only of artists, but also of different individuals, like migration, like pilgrimages, like kind of like different routes, like artists in residencies as well. So to start this project, the key point and the key question, and I'm gonna not read, but like I'm gonna check a document that I have here. The key question is basically to ask ourselves why artists have traveled and why traveling is like an important thing for artists. No, it's something that is given for granted. It's something that everyone thinks that, yeah, of course, the artists have to travel to get inspired and to get yeah, kind of like inputs, no? But the question is why, no? Why the artists need to travel? In that sense, I find it fascinating. Document written by this woman, Annika Wemberg, from the University of Helsinki, I think. It is called Glimpse from the History of Travel Among Artists. And interestingly enough, she's placing this history of artists traveling in the medieval times in Europe, and relating it a lot with monasteries as centers of situated knowledge and pilgrimage as strategies of individuals to kind of like go from one place to the other and collect stories, collect objects, no, collect different things that then they kind of like exhibit somehow in these monasteries. Interestingly enough, as well, these monasteries are not obviously focused in artistic production, but it's completely interdisciplinary, which includes like research on cosmology, research on kind of like yeah, in lots of other kinds of like fields, no, in philosophy, in mysticism, in mathematics, in different different disciplines that become transdisciplinary centers of knowledge production. And I find it that really great and really enlightening, even more, if you take into consideration that the history of artists in residencies, as it is explained in TransArtists, for example, or in ResArtists, the main networks of artists in residencies, is explained, in my understanding, from a Western-centric perspective. So it's explained from a process, this expansion of artists in residencies, from a process that goes from the West, from Europe, to the rest of the world with this globalization. Okay. So for me, that was a little bit strange. No, I was thinking about it, and I was kind of like, well, this is it's strange, because artists in residencies, actually what they promote is this, yes, this hospitality, this mobility of individuals, in this case artists, and cultural exchange. And it's really strange that this history of artists in residencies is being explained from a Eurocentric perspective, when the Arab culture has so much to offer, and so a really long history of promoting cultural exchange, mobility, and hospitality. No? In that sense, also interesting is like to see that Annika Wemberg, she places kind of like, instead of placing kind of like the start of artists in residencies at the start of the 20th century, which is the case in a TransArtists way of explaining this history, she places it in the medieval times. But if you pay attention, the medieval times in Europe was a moment of decadence, was a moment was a dark moment. No, it's considered like that. Instead, the medieval ages in the Arab world was kind of like the Enlightenment, no? Kind of like was a moment of kind of like really big expansion of different kind of like centers of knowledge production, with the construction from the 10th century of these like great madrasas, of these kind of like the expansion of the caravan routes in the Sahara as well, and kind of like the dissemination of different kind of like spaces that actually also promote this hospitality, this cultural exchange, and this mobility. For example, through funduks, ribats, oukalas, or zawiyas, no? Kind of like, obviously each of them has particularities, but all of them respond to kind of like this this idea of like somehow developing kind of like strategies of sharing and of exchanging, no? Together with that, obviously, you have also the Hajj, which is kind of like an obligation, no, in Islam, and I understand this obligation not as much as kind of like an obligation to go from one place to the other one, but an obligation to do the trip, no, and the trip itself becomes kind of like really important to know the other and to establish kind of like really bonds, no, kind of like links between the different communities that conform Islam. So, so yes, kind of like this is the starting point of this research, and obviously from this perspective, the belonging or kind of like being part of this project of the transdisciplinary studio, no, and this project that we are setting up somehow becomes super relevant in the sense of focusing much more in a research that takes into account this other alternative history of understanding mobility and understanding cultural mobility. In this sense also, last month I was in the Center of Research of the Sahara in Gardaya. That was kind of like a really fascinating kind of like experience for me. This center has kind of like a really amazing archive of photographies and of documents and texts from the 1840s until kind of like nowadays, but it's composed of kind of like this really interesting account of the first white fathers and other explorers, and also kind of like local explorers, when retracing the caravan routes and kind of like when investigating or when experiencing the caravan routes. And it was really great to be inside of this archive and to be able to kind of like have a look at all these photos and have a look at the work that they are doing. No, that for the other side was also really interesting. Because, you know, kind of like there is always the danger to fall in this kind of research, to follow some kind of like Orientalism, which is kind of like a big topic, obviously, right now with this emergence of post-colonial studies and kind of like this kind of like idea of decolonize, no, kind of like our histories, and actually kind of this rethinking of the artist in residency histories is part of this process of decolonizing this history. But at the same time, we have to be always really careful, no, how you approach this topic, and it's easy, no, to somehow fall into this kind of like exotic kind of like experiences. And obviously for me, it wasn't that difficult, no, to fall into that when I was reading all these books and I was having access to all these documents and all these photographies. But then kind of like what the shocking thing was that Gardaya itself nowadays is just kind of like a center of human trafficking. I mean, kind of like it's incredible how different communities like the Moazib community, which is the Berber community from Gardaya, which are these 5 fortresses, no, and has been there for 1,000 years. So this Moazib community is still keeping all this tradition, no, all this kind of like cosmology of knowledge, quite traditional, you could say, and how there has been kind of like this conflict between the Mohabites in the original settlers of Gardaya with the Arab tribes, the nomad tribes in the 10th and in the 11th and 12th centuries, but nowadays even more because there has been the discovery of petrol, apparently, and kind of like this big immigration of Arabs now into Gardaya, and that had created kind of like lots of kind of like conflicts, arriving to like a tipping point of violence in 2014 with kind of like the killing of more than 20 people. Besides that, besides these 2 communities, there is another community, which is the community of Nigerians that are coming from, obviously from Niger, no, going to Tamanrasset, and from Tamanrasset you go up there, no, up to Gardaya, and they live in some kind of like slums kind of thing. So this kind of like juxtaposition of kind of like me researching the caravan routes from this kind of like really kind of like colonial documents in the White Fathers Center for Research and Documentation of the Sahara, and then seeing this reality, for me creates kind of like a big kind of like contradiction somehow, no? And I'm just in the first stages of it, but I believe that HARAKAT, this platform, can be an umbrella for documenting, reflecting, and curating all these different knowledges and all these different ways of understanding the mobility, not only of artists, but also of kind of like there's different travelers, no, and individuals in the region. And to end with this explanation, just to say that another thing that I find it fascinating is that you could say, well, but artistic mobility, these people that was in the caravan routes, they were not artists, they were merchants. Yeah, of course they were merchants, but it's really interesting how the idea of being an artist was completely diluted somehow into other fields. For example, there was reading some of these documents, you can see that there is lots of merchants, that they are also philosophers, or they are also sociologists, or that they are also creative people, no? Kind of like documenting kind of like all these trips. So I found it that also like really great, no? That the art is not as kind of like a category that is makes sense per se, but that makes sense together kind of like with others, no? And this again, this kind of like building this bridge between different disciplines became essential in that sense as well. So I hope that with this belonging to this research group, which I find it fascinating, no, as well, in the different approaches, can help me on that matter, on kind of like continuing researching on these different topics, on kind of decolonizing the history of artists in residencies, on also kind of like rethinking the idea of the artist, no, and also recuperating kind of or making visible kind of like these other modes of like of the mobility of knowledges and mobility of people. And also, yeah, I'm just kind of like super excited about it, and I think for now this is all what I wanted to explain you. And yes, I mean, I'm really keen and looking forward to kind of like a change much more with all of you.
Yeah, well, thanks for this huge explanation. Maybe for the people it could be a little bit difficult to follow from the beginning to the end the fact how everything is connected.
Yes, it's a little bit like for now. It seems that it's not, and it's a little bit kind of like dispersed. But hopefully we will find a way to connect these different ideas. No, I think I have the impression that there is a way, and if there is no way, maybe they are not connected. But for sure, there's the research itself is it can be useful, I believe.
No, but also I'm very interested about what you said on the perspective from Europe that they have from people living in Africa, and maybe if they are aware how things have been working and how they are working now, could be more interesting in order to understand what happened and in order to understand what is happening now. It doesn't matter if we are talking about colonization, if we are talking about immigration nowadays, or if we are talking about craftsmen, or if we are talking about many subjects, because I think there is one point in common, it's the desert. You said that the desert is understood as a barrier. Once you understand a little bit how it works, the mentality of people living in the desert, you are aware that it was the opposite. It was really a connection between different countries and between different cultures. Maybe today we have that problem. Even people living in Morocco don't recognize this fact, and always I think, I don't know why, it could be a sociological issue. But why people from Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, they are more linked to Europe than to the continent, to the African continent. Because also to understand all these countries, first of all, you have to understand the environment, the cultural environment. Maybe Morocco has been more important the relations with Mali, with Senegal, with Mauritania, and of course with Algeria, even to Sudan, that the relation with Europe, with Spain, with France. So maybe they have first of all to think about that relation. Where are they coming, in order to understand what's happening now and what could happen in the future. And that's something I have learned during my researches on the desert and on caravans, because it was the caravan and the desert who led these people be linked in many different ways. And many different ways, I mean also with the difficulties they had through the history. It's like now, people are complaining they cannot cross the border, but also some years ago it has the same problem with there were problems between tribes, so you have to change the road of the caravans. For me, of course, it's the tool people use to make this exchange, cultural exchange, with the caravan, who is very, very interesting. And also because you can find still people in Morocco that they are aware of this past. For example, people that are musicians and they know that his family came from Yemen 2 centuries ago. And also once you start to, overall people living in desert regions, there are much things in common with all the people, even if they are 200 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers away. For example, people from the south of Morocco and people from Sudan, they have a lot of things in common, even the way of thinking, due to the desert, no. And also the heritage we have today, thanks to the caravans, also could be very interesting to be analyzed. You have the culture, you have the tribes that have come from other countries and now they are living in another one, and also the cities or places that have been very important at the moment, and how you can nowadays see that heritage thanks to caravans. Of course, we have in mind cities like Marrakech or Fez, but there were other small cities or places like Hamid or like Tirmart, at least in Morocco, maybe Gardaya also as a place where caravans crossed. And they crossed with all the sense, physically, culturally, sociology, and that could be very, very interesting also to be traced. Why not to be understood why people did that, no? And then as an architect, for me, it's also interesting that the traces that led this exchange through caravans on architecture. We were talking some weeks ago about the funduks, and also funduks that you can still visit in Marrakech or in Fez, but also the kind of nomad architecture like tents or many other things. So maybe if we just do us now to share the experiences and the knowledge, maybe we can change completely the point of view we all of us had from this region. No? For me, it was amazing how when Amado Al-Fatni started to share the documentation he got from the Sudan University. The map of the connections of Africa change a lot, because when you are making research in one point, you can know what the history of that place. But if you link that to what happened at the same time in other places, even if they are far away, you can better understand all the links that we are talking about. You know?
Absolutely, yes. Actually, kind of like it was really interesting. Last 2 days ago, or maybe 3, there was this article in La Vanguardia that was saying something like, well, it was kind of like it's a map of kind of like all the contemporary threats, no, that contemporary like dangers of the Sahara, basically, as kind of like a breach not only of human knowledge and exchange and commerce, but commerce of kind of like human trafficking and arms, no, and weapons. And it's fascinating when I send it to you. Because it's just kind of like the map is just kind of like is really incredible, no? How somehow also kind of like traces all these lines in the Sahara. And I think that kind of like this comparative approach is quite needed as well, no? Kind of like to see kind of like how this history has been evolved, no? Not only from the caravan period, which is fascinating and it needs to be researched, obviously, and it's kind of like really, really crucial, but also kind of like how this links to the contemporary situation, no?
Yeah, I think that will be great. If I have been thinking about your mapping idea.
Yeah.
Because the conversation I had with Eleonora Castagnone, she's a sociologist, and she was very, very interested in compare the caravan roads with the roads that immigrants do today to arrive to Northern Africa. Maybe that would be great if we put in another layer the actual map you did on artist residencies in the north of Africa. Maybe we are going to find a relation. I don't know. That would be maybe interesting to study if there are some connections. Of course, you are not moving if you are living in Morocco and you are going to Algeria. You are going to take a plane. You're not going to move by caravan. But just to check the relation to between all these layers, and maybe I'm pretty sure we are going to find a lot of relations.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just sent you the photo, but then I'm going to in our folders here as well, and it would be really amazing to also like to share more information with her. So yes, perfect. It's in Facebook.
Yeah, I'm going just to share that image.
It's incredible, yeah.
So everybody can take a look about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I think that's for sure that these connections has a lot of things in common with the caravan roads. So.
Yes, totally. And but then also kind of like to think about it in all these misconceptions as well, no? Kind of like this article, it says kind of like the threats, no? Kind of like it comes from the kind of the Sahel region being kind of like one of the most unstable and one of the most dangerous, no? From in the planet, and kind of like exporting all these kind of like dodgy activities, no, of human traffic, like armed traffic, and kind of like of kind of like falsified kind of like goods as well. So kind of like it's interesting to kind of like really counterbalance kind of like this discourse that is becoming really mainstream and really harmful as well, no? Yeah. So I believe kind of like the function of a transdisciplinary studio, or the project that we are doing together, is really, really contemporary and really essential as well, no, in these different perspectives. So yeah.
Okay, I think it's enough. If enough, we are going to be
can continue.
to others. Yeah, we are going to continue to talk first of all with all the people that are participating in this group, and then I hope that they are going to talk between you in a specifically way if there are some subjects you are interested on.
Okay.
We will keep in touch.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Carlos, for this.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.